So I'm Chuck Newberg. I'm one of the professors here on campus, and I thought I'd look at this calculator here. This is by far my favorite inexpensive calculator out here. And the yellow version is the school property. So these are the same copies we keep on campus to have handy. My topics, I thought I'd go over an overview of the calculator, and then I thought I'd talk a little bit about the mode menu and some of its features so we understand what it can do. And then we'll look at some calculations and a couple of convenient buttons. And if we have time, I'll show you how to build a quick table. And then we maybe get to the probability menu. And if we really get down to here, I'll be impressed, because I only got a half hour and I do like to talk a lot. So, all right. So let me blow this up here. And let's talk about some of the key features on this calculator to begin with. And so up here, I always like to point out a quick button. Oops, that's way too big. So up here, I always like to point out this button to begin with. That's the mode button, and that's where you go to set different modes and stuff. Most of the time, you won't be messing with that if you're just in a regular college algebra class or something like that. You'll mess with that more when you go on to take trigonometry or in calculus. All right, then some other key features I want to point out really quickly. This one always kind of messes with people. This button here is our power button. And just a couple other key features here. Here is when you turn on your calculator. So believe it or not, when I first taught graphing calculators, all their videos started with turn on your calculators. So turn on your calculators. All right, so we have some cool features. This is a solar calculator, so it does charge up, but it has a battery. So if your calculator goes bad, the batteries are only like 90 cents to buy. They're easy to change. So if they go bad, try letting them out in the sun a little bit first, but you may have to replace the battery. So, all right, let's see here. Oops, should be a link here. All right, so what else did I want to talk about? Actually, I think I did all that. I added an extra slide I shouldn't have added. Okay. Supposed to be a link. Guess it's not going to link today. Okay, so let's go through the mode menu to start with. Sorry if you're getting whiplash there. Let's go through the mode menu. All right, come on, calculator, computer, come on. Okay, so let's go through the mode menu to begin with. So go ahead and hit the red button if you want. Come on in, there's seats in the back there. Go ahead and over there, we won't bite. So here's the mode menu. And the first thing up here is you'll see DEG, which stands for degrees. This stands for radians, and this stands for gradients. You will only use these features if you're taking trigonometry or doing some trig. All right, so most students worry about what this is set on. The reality is it can be set on anything, and unless you're doing some trig functions, it won't affect your answers at all. Then down here, this next thing, we have norm, we have science, and we have ENG, engineering. Norm is like normal mode. So that's going to have it just look like regular numbers before. Scientific, this will put your computations into scientific mode, scientific format, where we have a number times a power of 10. And then engineering, this one took me a second to figure out. Engineers have their own goofy notation. They like to have powers of 3 on their 10s. So this is like scientific notation, except they like powers of 3. And I think that just has to do with figuring out magnitudes. All right, so let's scroll down here. And so often my students get worried when they see this and they're going to do a simple calculation and they see this DEG here. They can ignore it because all it says is, hey, my calculator is in degree modes, and unless I'm going to use the trig functions, which are sine, cosine, tangent, it doesn't matter. So if you're going to do a calculation, that degree is always going to be up there. So I had a student trying to figure out how to get rid of it. I said, this isn't degree mode. It's like, don't worry about it. It doesn't affect anything. The next thing I want to point out is, well, here, I want to point this out. So now I've switched my mode. And how do I know I switched my mode? You see right here, I'm in scientific here. So I'm in scientific calculations. And so when you do here, I'm doing 5.2 times 785. And what does scientific notation do again? It always puts out a number here. This number here is always between 1 and 10. And then over here, we have a power of 10. All right, so this would be like you're doing a big calculation in what? Like calculating out like the distance to the moon and things like that. You'll put those in scientific mode. And so I just want to point out that is scientific. Now, if you're interested, what does engineering mode look like? Well, engineering mode, I still did a calculation, but it didn't put a number between 1 and 10 here. It put a power that was a multiple of 3, and then this is whatever it had to be. All right, so in case you're wondering, what is engineering mode? It's powers of 3 versus scientific. The next thing I wanted to talk about, oh, and then here, I put it in fixed mode, and I'll go back here in a second. How do I know it's fixed? Because it says fixed. And if you come over here, how many decimal points do we see here? 3. So this is fixed 3. Those fixes, like you want to have only certain amount of decimal points show up, you could fix it. So like maybe I'm an accounting major and we don't look anything after what, pennies, 2 decimal points. Maybe I fix all my calculations to what, 2 decimal values. So if you're always wondering what mode I'm in, if you don't see fix, scientific, or engineering, you're in what's normal mode.
Will it round it for you then?
Yes, it will round it. Yes, it always rounds to the nearest half. So standard rounding conventions. Good question there, young lady. All right. So here I've done the same calculation up here, and I should have found one that rounded. It took it to 3. But if you remember from your early days, when you multiply decimals, how many decimal place values you end up with? You add them up. 1 there, 3 there. So if I was to multiply this together, I would have actually what? 4 decimal place values. So it did round it off. So if we took that out of fixed mode, that would actually be what it looked like. So if you're like, man, I'm not getting enough decimal place values, well, it could be you're in fixed mode. All right. And then I wanted to talk one more thing here. And this is why I really like this calculator. There is classic, and then there's math print. In the early days, they used to call math print pretty print. I think they changed it. It sounded kind of hokey. Classic. So let me go to classic notation here. I've switched it to classic mode. When I switch it to classic mode, it looks like your parents' calculator. It doesn't put up the exponents. Here we have 5 to the 3rd power plus 2 divided by 3. This doesn't look how you'd like write it on paper. In math print, which is the mode I always recommend leaving it on, in math print, in this mode, you will see that the exponent here looks like an exponent. That's how you'd write it on your paper. And then you get your answer here, and it looks like what you write. So it's nice. Now, let's say I didn't want this. Your professor, Newberg, he really likes the answers to be in fraction. All right. There is one super cool button on this calculator that's so much cooler than the other buttons. And it's this button right here, this double one. What happens to it if you hit that, and you'll notice it's hit here because you can see the red arrow there. I hit this, and what it did is it took that previous answer, which was a decimal approximation, and it put it in what? Exact form. So that double arrow there goes from approximate form to exact form. So that's a nice little button. And it's hard to see because I wrote it over there a long time ago and over there, but I've highlighted it on both of those handouts there. Okay. Then the other thing I want to point out is if you put in the square root of 12 on your calculator, and we'll do this here in a second, in, what was it called? Math print again? it will take that and reduce that. So notice that the square root of 12, if we remember 12, 12 is what? 4 times 3. Well, what is the square root of 4? Class, the square root of 4 is 2, so it comes out of the radical, and then comes the 3. Now let's say for some strange reason your math teacher needs this as an exact, a decimal, approximation. Well, what would I do? I would hit that special little button there. I would hit that special little button down here, this double arrow there, which is white on your screen until you hit it. And what does it do? It takes it from the exact form to what? The decimal form. And you notice this? I get lots of decimal place values because what? I'm not fixed. It's in normal mode. All right, so that's kind of a nice button. Some people like, it always gives me the exact answer. And then they think, oh, I got to switch it to classic. No, you don't have to switch it to classic. Leave it in math print because it's much nicer. All right, so that's the modes. And so let me get my calculator out here now. And let's go ahead and let's just practice a calculation here. Let's just go ahead and let's say we're going to do a calculation and I want to go, let's make it 4 decimal place values. So the first thing I want to do is I want to, oops, this is a calculator, it's not a screen here. Let me do, so let's say I want to go, we're going to fix it to 4 place values. Get down here. So we're going to go to fix. Let me get a little thicker pen now. We're going to fix the 4 place values. And we're going to do, let's go with 4.563 times 3.781. All right. And I'm going to change that one. I hate this when this happens. But I'm going to change that 1 to a 5 to address the good question we had earlier. All right, so that's our problem. And I'm going to have to write this up here because my Surface Pro is being a little finicky. It's not wanting to do some screens there. So now let's get out our calculator. And the first thing is let's go to our mode. So I'm going to go ahead and click the mode button. Nice thing about this, using Surface Pro is the pen works as on the calculator. I go to mode, and I'm going to toggle down. I'm going to use these arrows over here. I'm going to toggle down and get it to float. Floating means it puts the decimal point wherever I want, and I'm going to scroll over, and how many decimal points did I say again? I said 4, right? So I'm going to get to 4 there. See how that 4 is flashing up here? See how that 4 is flashing? Now I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to lock that in. So if you're trying to change your modes, you got to get it flashing first, and then you hit enter. And now notice it went from float. Float is when it just puts the decimal point anywhere to what? Now it's fixed at 4. So let's do this calculation. 4 point, oops, I gotta get out of there. So 4 point, what was it again? 563 times, oops, I hit a double times there. Let me back up. And then what? 3.785. 3.785. And let's hit enter. And we see our answer right there. And how many decimal place values does it have? It has what? 4 place values. All right, now if you thought about multiplying this out, you got 3 decimal place values there, you got 3 decimal place values there. So if you were going to multiply this out, old school, you'd actually have up to 6 place values. Let's change our mode again. And let's go back to float. So change it back to float, highlight the float, and hit enter. And then I'm going to quit out of here. So I'm going to go second, and then the quit is up there by the second. So second, quit. All right, let you get caught up. Now, let's look at this calculation again, and this time without it fixed. So the nice thing about this calculator is, and I don't know if you've noticed here, with these little arrows here, that means there's stuff above. You can actually go back up and pull down your calculations and see them later. And so I'm just going to go back up here. I'm going to hit the arrow up here to that calculation. See how that's highlighted? All right, now I want to use that again. So I'm just going to hit enter. And notice what it did. It pulled it back down. So if you have a complicated calculation and you put it all in and you realize I wanted to do a 4 instead of a 5, you can go up and pull it down and change that. Now let's hit enter. And now we see what? All 6 decimal place values. So now let's go back to that question we had earlier. Does it round? Well, we fixed it at 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I'm chopping at 4, I go out, what, the 5th? That's 5 or above, so I'd round up. That makes that 9, what, a 10? So yes, it does round. So, all right. And, okay. So let's see here. Continuing on now. I got to get back to my presentation. And let me get this down mode here so I can see my pages since my links aren't working very well. All right, we talked about the mode menu. All right, so now let's talk about some calculations. One of the nice things about this calculator is it has some great fraction features. So let's take a problem here, and the problem I want to take is, I can write it on here. I better write it here. Let's say 4/7 plus 2/3. All right, and what's the answer going to be there? 12, 14, 26, 21st. All right, so now, I imagine most of you probably can't add that fast, right? Anybody get 26 over 21? I can take you on, most days I can beat you on the calculator, can't I, Brian? All right, so most of us haven't been trained to add them like I've been trained, but that's all right. I tell my students, you don't have to have those mad skills because I learned before calculators. So I have skills that we just don't teach anymore. So now I want to do 4/7. If you look here, we have this fraction button right there, numerator over denominator. There's a couple of choices there. First thing is I like to just go ahead and hit my numerator. What's my numerator there? 4. So I just go ahead and hit 4. And now I hit the numerator over denominator, and notice what happened? I'm sitting there now, what? Waiting for the denominator. And what's my denominator? My denominator is 7. So I went ahead and 7. And you notice what? I'm still down here in denominator land. How am I going to get out of denominator land? I'm going to what? Use my toggle arrow to get out of there. And then what? I said plus, and then what? 2/3. 2, and I'll go ahead and hit the fraction again, 2/3, and I'll hit enter. And notice it did give the same answer, 26 over 21st. And so we have all those fractions skills, this calculator can handle. If you notice down here, we got our fraction button. Up here, we have a mixed fraction. So if you actually wanted to work with mixed numbers, a whole number and fraction, over here we have it so it can convert from an improper fraction to a mixed number. And then this last button here converts from fractions to decimals. This button's not even needed because what else can do fractions to decimals? This magic button right here. Sorry, this is kind of, I've never used that button. It feels a little lonely on my calculator. All right, so we can add fractions and multiply and divide. So let's take another fraction here. Let's take the fraction 15 over 20. Does that fraction reduce? It does. So I want you to type in 15 over 20 on your calculator as a fraction and just hit enter for me. And so I'll do the same. You can hit the fraction button first if you want. I prefer to hit it after because it just saves me. And I'll type in the 15. I'll toggle down and put in a 20. And I hit enter. And what do you notice? It reduced it to what? 3/4. So they will reduce fractions. There is a limitation, but you're not going to run into those fraction limitations because they're big limitations. All right, so we can add, subtract, multiply, and divide with fractions. Let me get back to my notes here. Okay. Powers. So let's talk about powers. And remember, what is a power again? Repeated multiplication. So let's take like 2 cubed. which really means 2 times 2 times 2, which is what, 8. So now, whenever I learn a button on my calculator, if I can, I like to use one I know the answer to. So how do we get to the power again? And let's see, it's a little high up there for me to reach. If we look here, this caret key, which is the caret key on your keyboard, that's the power key. That is also the power key in Excel. So nice thing is, it's pretty much the standard power symbol for powers everywhere. So let's just hit 2 cubed to make sure we have that ability there. So I'm going to hit a 2, I'm going to hit the power, and I'm going to hit the 3. And you notice in math print, it looks like how you write it on your paper. It looks like how I wrote it on the board there, and I hit enter. All right, so now your challenge is this one. Let's go 5 squared plus 3 to the 4th minus 2. I want you to try to put this in as one expression. So what are you going to do? You're going to hit 5 squared. And then as you do that, make sure you get out of the powers, and I want to challenge you real quick to do this problem for me. Okay, so we have 2 choices for a square, by the way. I should point that out. We actually have 2 choices for a square. We have the square, and we have this here for a power. So if I hit the square, let me hit the square there. You notice it puts me up as a square, and I'm sitting back what I call ground level. Let me back up here. Let me just hit clear. And let me show you if I hit 5 squared like that using the power button, am I still sitting up in exponent land? I am. So you have to watch out. If you're using powers, you got to make sure you get out of exponent land. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle down there. So notice I'm down on ground level now, and I'm going to go what? Plus 3 to the 4th, plus 3 to the 4th, and I'm still up in exponent land. So I got to get down for what? Subtraction. So I toggle down, and then what? Subtract 2, and hit enter, and we should have come up with what? 104. All right, so we can do powers. We can do any power we want. We have a built-in convenient square power because we do a lot of squares, but any other power we want is what? Right there. We might as well talk about square roots and cube roots now. All right, so let's go back to here. So let's say I want to do the cube root of 125. Anybody know what the cube root of 125 is off the top of their head? 5. Very good there, Daniel. It's 5. So now let's see how we can get that on our answer. Okay, so first off, let me go back to my calculator here. And the button we're going to look at is right here. It's on the second level of our powers. So we're going to go second and that. And let me do that real quick. Okay. Now let's look here. What happened? Well, you see I have the root here, but what do you have here? A and S. What's A and S? That's the answer from the previous line. So right now I'm doing the 104th power, 104th root of whatever number I'm going to put in there. So what root did I want to do? I wanted to do the cube root, right, of 125. So you have to watch this. This is one of those times. Let me clear this out here. You got to hit the root first. I hit the 3 first, not double 3. I hit the 3 first, and then I go second root. And notice what happened. Math print made that look like what? The cube root there. And then I hit 8. No, I said 125. 125 and hit enter, and the answer is what? 5. So we can do any root we want. If we want to do a square root, it's built in like the square's built in, because we by far use these 2 buttons the most. They are convenient buttons. But sometimes we got to do the cube root, sometimes we got to do the 5th root. So your challenge now is to find me the 5th root of 32. Had to do some finger math there. All right, so what would I do first? I'd enter in the 5, then I'd go to my root button, and I type in 32, and my fingers told me the answer was 2. Let's see if the answer is 2. The answer is what, 2? I learned how to do my powers of 2 on my fingers as an undergrad. All right. Next topic. Okay, roots we've talked about. All right. PEMDAS. What is PEMDAS again? Our order of operations. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, parentheses first, exponents second, multiplication, division third, and addition and subtraction. Guess what? PEMDAS is built in. You do not have to worry about order of operations. If you type it in how it looks on your paper, the calculator will recognize the order of operations. All right. So one thing we should notice, though, is what if we have this here, minus 8 squared? Well, is that in parentheses? It is. If you put it into your calculator this way, what's your calculator going to see? Well, it sees order of operations. It sees the square first, and then it sees this as multiplying by -1. So this answer would be what? -64. It'd square it first. If you want the -8 squared, you're going to have to remember what? Parentheses. And notice on our calculator, we have some great parenthesis buttons. So your calculator has no brain. That's a few models out, but it is. I can't wait for we get AI chat inside our calculators. I'll probably be retired by then, but that's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. I'm predicting it now. And it won't know the difference between those. So you have to tell it. It has PEMDAS. All right, let's end with one complicated problem here. I'm not going to get to tables today. All right, here we have a formula. Anybody recognize this formula? Rhonda, you should recognize this formula. I'm sure you saw it 20-some years ago, maybe 25 years ago. This is the formula. If you know how much you're financing your house for and the interest rate, this will tell you your monthly payment. This is the same formula when I first bought my house and I was at the bank and we were calculating out payments, and me and the banker, we agreed to the nearest penny. So let's say we're going to buy a house, and we're going to buy a house for $150,000, which seems like a lot, but it's not for this day and age. Let's say our interest rate is let's say our interest rate is 5%. And we'll go ahead and convert that over to a decimal. And n's the number of payments you make in a year, and n's always going to be 12. And then let's finance our house for 30 years, the longest you can finance. So I'm going to plug in all this information. We're going to have, let me get some space here. Oops. Oh, come on, pen. All right, so we're going to have, this is going to be 150,000 times 0.05 divided by 12 over 1 minus 1 plus 0.05 divided by 12 to the minus 12 times 30. All right, and this, is that? All right, this is our calculation. 25 years ago when I was teaching this, this was a nightmare. Now on this calculator, this is a standard calculation. All right, so first thing is I need to take a quick picture of this because I'm not going to write this down on the board here because I got to go to my calculator, and I'm going to challenge you to as well to try to enter this in. So what's our big thing here? We have a big old what? Fraction, right? So let's start, let me start by just clearing my history here. And clear my screen here. Let's start with a fraction. Big fraction. And then what's up in the top there again? 150,000. 150,000. 150,000. and then it was times. So let's hit the times. And then if you look, and I'm sorry I didn't give you a chance to write this down, but there was another fraction. And what was that other fraction? Well, I'll hit the fraction to begin with. It was the interest rate, which was 0.05, divided by how many payments you make in a year, which would be what? 12. All right, that looks complicated, right? If you don't think that looks complicated, it was way complicated in the early days to put that in a calculator. Now the bottom, well, what was the bottom again? The bottom was, to start with, it was 1 minus. And then it had a parenthesis. So let's go with the left parenthesis. And then it had a 1 plus, and then it had another fraction. So let's add another fraction. Hit that little fraction button. And it had 0.05 divided by 12. 0.05 divided by 12. And notice that's going to look just like we had there. And then I'm down in the denominator. I got to get out of the denominator. I toggle out of the denominator. And then the next thing it had was another parenthesis. And then it had a power. So let's hit our power button. Hit our little power button there. Okay, now in this power there was a multiplication. And what was the multiplication? First off, it was a negative 12. That's subtraction, that's negative. So let's hit the negative 12, and then it was times 30. All right, so that is a lot of order of operations there, if you look at that. And I'm just going to quickly flash back to my screen. And I want you to decide, does that kind of look like what I have on my calculator? It does, doesn't it? It matches up. That's that math print. So let's go back over and hit enter. And hit enter. And what would your monthly payment be if you financed a $150,000 house? That's your finance at what? 5% interest for 30 years? Your monthly payment would be $805.23. And so that's a complicated formula, but the nice thing about this little calculator is with the math print and the order of operations built in, you can do this in one fell swoop. You don't have to sit there and do one little piece, write it down, do another little piece, write it down, and then what? Merge the pieces together. I'm sure well, maybe not you, because you have all grown up in the era of great calculators. In my day, we didn't have great calculators, so sometimes we wrote that down and then did it later. Right, Rhonda? Yep, and Sarah, right? Yes, we remember those days. All right, I wished I had more time because I could always talk about this calculator more. Thanks for coming, and